I don't really see it as a viable option.
I mean, I affirm a three self view personally, but what I was trying to show is that if we were to take a one self view, I don't believe there's a problem there. That's what I'm trying to show in it. But personally, I'll probably go with a three self view. But no. I mean, the argument I'm giving from love, that specific one, I don't believe it's wedded to a three self view, even though Swinburne's is. So Swinburne's is wedded to a three self view. But the one I'm trying to push, I don't believe it is. It's sort of quiet on the matter.
And you have you put the paper out already on that?
Yeah. So,
if you can just send me that.
I will send it.
And then I do have to run.
Yeah, we can catch up more.
If I could squeeze in one last question. I'm just going to give him one last question, and I actually have to run. So this idea of God as a necessary being, right? It seems to me that in your discussion with Mullins, and that you take sort of a Swinburnian view in which God isn't necessary, including the Father. That's the way that I understood it. Specifically on your whole analogy of the intrinsic properties of God and what you consider the great-making properties. To me, all of those scenarios, like the example you gave of the lonely rock existing, right? It assumes that God isn't necessary because there's a possibility in which he doesn't exist, and all you have is the lonely rock, right? So just for clarity's sake, what is your position on that? And does part of your argument for trying to show that aseity cannot be an intrinsic property is inherent within that classification of those attributes, assume that God is not logically necessary?
No, just going with the second point first. I don't think it does, and I'm still, because I've had this issue with trying to understand Ryan's objection as well.
Yeah, but do you get what I'm trying to say?
I get what you're trying to say. But I'm trying to understand the objection, because the point is just the idea that if we take, an intrinsic property to be one that's not dependent upon our situation. So whatever object has a property, if that property is not dependent upon the situation, the external situation of that object, then it's an internal it's an intrinsic property. But if it is dependent in some way upon its situation, then it's extrinsic property. And so what Lewis tries to do, so David Lewis tries to do with his lonely object thing, is trying to say, well, if a property can be had by a lonely object and can be had by an accompanied object, and if it can be lacked by a lonely object and lacked by an accompanied object, then it's an intrinsic property. So he's just trying to say the property itself, not the object, but can the property itself be had or lacked? And is it dependent upon its environment or not? If it can be had or lacked and it's not dependent upon its environment, then it's intrinsic. And so what I'm trying to say to you is, with the property of aseity, it is not like that, because it is dependent upon its environment. Because if an entity, so not God, but if an entity is ase, so that means it's not dependent upon anything else, and it's not caused by anything else, can it be had by an accompanying object? Yes. But can it be lacked by a lonely object? No. Because for it to be lacked, that means that it has to have a cause. So, but for it to have a cause, it has to be accompanied by something that causes it. And so, but now, what I wanted to bring up as well is that with Ryan, there was also a misconception had with essential and intrinsic. So,
I recognize that. So I'm not trying to make that point.
So with the intrinsic property, for example, of omnipotence is an intrinsic property, because an entity can have it can lack it, lonely or accompanied. But aseity is not like that, because it can't have it when it's unaccompanied, when it's lonely. So there's a distinction to be had between those properties. So for me, it's nothing to do with God being necessary, him himself.
I think it is, though, because in order for that example to even work, that has to be a genuine possibility. Otherwise, you're just spouting meaningless words in a sense. So what I'm saying is, if God is logically necessary, and I'm not saying that you have to take that view, but if God is logically necessary, then that scenario in which God doesn't exist, because he doesn't exist in that situation, which you have a lonely rock that exists alone and is ase. it's only the rock, right? So if that is a genuine possibility, how could God be logically necessary? You should be able to derive a contradiction from that scenario.
I mean, I'm not. If it is entailing that God can't be logically necessary, I don't have a
Meaning
problem.
in the sense of ontological argument, like a strong ontological argument. If you're using a strong ontological argument to say that God is logically necessary, not merely metaphysically necessary, or even if you wanted to say something less than that and say he's contingent. So it seems to me that in order to use those examples, they assume that a lonely rock existing a se is a genuine possibility, because if it's not, then that's not a possible world, because God exists in every possible world, and therefore there could never be any other lonely object, including a rock or anything else.
No, I have no problem. If it is that there's an entailment that God is logically contingent, then that's not...
Or even if you wanted to say, I mean, if you want to say he's logically contingent, or I haven't thought about it, maybe you could say that he's metaphysically necessary. I would have to give that more thought, but I don't think you would be able to affirm that model and way of arguing while at the same time saying that strictly speaking God is logically necessary, because it seems to be a contradiction between that. On the one hand, if God is logically necessary, then that other situation is impossible. It's logically impossible, and so therefore you can't use that as a means of getting the attribute of aseity being extrinsic off the ground. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, there's two ways. I want to think a little bit more deeper about it, but it could be that the argument itself is predicated on epistemic possibility, and epistemic possibility understood from the sort of Saul-Kripke sense, that something's epistemically possible, and then you need a posteriori investigation to understand if it's metaphysically possible or impossible. So it could be that this is just saying it's an epistemic possibility. That's something I do want to think about deeper.
But then the question will be, is that enough to get it off the ground?
No, that's fine. That's fine. So something I'll think about a little bit deeper. But the second thing is, as well, is I still don't see the problem if it does entail that God is logically contingent.
No,
for me as
but
well.
There's a reason why I'm bringing it up, and I'll tell you why. Not to do with you specifically, but I will actually say it and play a bit of my cards. Have Dr. Branson's argument is based on a modal ontological argument for the necessity of the Son. Within his presentation, he's utilizing your part of what I just said, this discussion, as part of his argument for establishing that aseity is an extrinsic property. I'm saying that those two arguments directly contradict one another, because the argument for the necessity of the Son, he's using S5 and is predicated on logical necessity, not God being even metaphysically necessary, and definitely not logically contingent. And so therefore, to use that argument and that as supplementary or in line with it entails a contradiction. They're contradictory to one another.
No, I understand. I'm very interested to see your dialogue with him. But personally myself, I don't really affirm.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on it.
I understand. But I'm interested to see the dialogue. I am at the moment though thinking about something I'm thinking about a little bit more deeper. Is necessity so important? When you take a fundamentality framework. And so for me, I'm trying to think more. I don't really have a problem if God is logically contingent. So long as he's fundamental and the most fundamental entity that exists, then I don't see necessity as being absolutely important. But it's something I'm thinking about a little bit deeper. But I am very interested.
Well, you do like Swinburne, so
No, I mean, Swinburne's my guy. So whatever he says.
But then would you, in that sense, would you give all modal a status equally to the Father, Son, and Spirit, in the same sense that you would say that even though the Father is fundamental, each one of the persons are equally logically contingent?
Oh yes,
Okay, you would just if you went that route, you would just do it across the board.
I think I'll be that.
Okay.
But it's something I do need to think deeper. But I will look out for your dialogue with Bo and see how that goes.
So Bo sees this. I've played a bit of my cards, but I really do think that this is a very strong argument against his. At least internally, I think I can derive a contradiction from what he's expressed in the video. And to be quite honest, what I think happened, and I'll just say quite frankly, I think because you share a similar view in trying to assert that aseity is not a necessary property in order to be God, he took some of your material, which was novel, and trying to argue that, and incorporated it into his view without realizing that it contradicts the very argument that he's using. So that's my position.
I haven't watched the video that he did, so I'm interested to watch that as well.
Because he did slightly modify it from our original discussion, and he did say that he modified his argument due to his discussion with me, but I think in modifying it and adding certain things to it, such as your view, which I'm not saying yours is incoherent because you're happy to say, well, yeah, God could be logically contingent, in which case, at least internally, we could argue if that's problematic or not, but internally it would be consistent. I'm saying for his view, and specifically his view to try to prove the necessity of the Son is problematic. Yeah. Awesome. So that's the reason why I brought it up, because I wanted to see just what your thoughts were if I was making sense, because sometimes you think of an idea and you think it's you think it's smart, but you find out it doesn't make much sense. So
Jake, I'll let you go to your
I actually have to go teach a class now, guys. So it was great talking with you, bro.
Good as always, and we'll carry on.
All right, God willing. Assalamu alaikum.